Time is 7 p.m. Welcome to the meeting of the Willdale Community Development Commission. My name is Jamie Ochoa, and I'm the chairman for this committee. With that, Ms. Secretary, can we do a roll call?
Mr. Babowis.
Here.
Mr. Ochoa.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Here. Mr. Shemanek. Here. Ms. Zatko. Here. Mr. Woods.
Here.
And Mr. Surma is absent.
CDC has a quorum present. Moving on, we need a motion to approve the meeting minutes from March 21st, 2022.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of March 21st, 2022.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
There being a motion and a second, all in favor signify so by saying yes.
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 All those opposed signify by stating no. Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Moving on to our public hearings for tonight. Mr. Conway, as chairman, I request that you serve as public hearing facilitator for tonight's hearings.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a couple prefatory remarks about our hearing process. For our public hearings, all testimony will be given under oath. At the hearing, there will be an opportunity for the public to offer testimony and to comment. Following the public hearing, the CDC's deliberations will be open to the public in the sense that all are invited to listen and watch. The public, however, may not speak during the CDC's deliberations. Please be advised that this is a formal legal proceeding that is being recorded. The city's representatives will provide a general description of the proposal, followed by their analysis. With respect to others who wish to speak, you may give an opinion or present specific evidence regarding the matters before us tonight. Prior to making any statements, kindly approach the podium and speak into the microphone. Finally, we'll strictly adhere to the schedule prepared for tonight's hearing. However, those wishing to submit evidence and testimony will be afforded sufficient time within which to do so. Whether you're a member of the public wishing to make a statement for the record or a testifying witness, you will be placed under oath and then begin by stating your name and address. You'll be subject to questions by the Community Development Commission and potential cross-examination. To allow as many people to be heard as possible, we request that you limit your remarks to 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to call tonight's first matter. This is case number CDC 2022-01. This is an application that's been filed requesting approval of a lot consolidation and map amendment or rezoning of residential property from R1 State Residential upon annexation to R4 Medium Density Single Family. The subject property is located at 5 North 510 and 5 North 514 North Pine Lane. The new address upon annexation will be 160 Line Lane. Dolce and Marco Guzman are the owners of the parcel and are the petitioners. Staff, please indicate when notice of hearing was published and whether you have the certificate of publication from the newspaper.
Would you raise your right hand, state your name, please, and address?
Gosha Pocheja, 404 North Wooddale Road, Wooddale, Illinois.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Thank you. Yes, the publication, the public hearing notice was published in Daily Herald on April 1st, and a copy of the certificate of publication is on file with the city.
Okay. We will start with is the applicant here tonight? Okay. Could you so kindly approach the podium and say a few words to the CDC in support of your application?
Will each of you raise your right hand, please, and state your names and address?
Marco Guzman, 2403 Geneva Avenue, North Lake, Illinois, 60164.
Dulce Guzman, 2403 Geneva Avenue, North Lake, Illinois, 60164.
Do you both swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We're here because we want to annex these two lots into the city of Woodell, and eventually we're planning on building a new single-family home. That's pretty much it. That's the project.
Okay. Did the CDC members have any questions for the applicants? Okay, does staff have any remarks it would wish to make in
Yes, I
connection with this application?
Thank you. Yes, we do have a brief presentation. So this is just for location purposes. The two properties are currently vacant lots on Pine Avenue. As you can see, Pine doesn't continue all the way south, but these two subject properties actually have frontage on Pine, so they could be developed. The property owners have actually contacted the city quite some time ago, last year, with the intent to do that. However, they needed to work with the original developer of the property because there was a recapture agreement in place. That all has been resolved and paid, and that's why they've applied to the city for voluntary annexation into the city. And as part of that, they're seeking to consolidate the two lots into one single family, into one lot, zoning lot, and also to rezone it to match the surrounding zoning district. This is the zoning of properties. Obviously, right now, they're a blank, they're white because it is unincorporated DuPage County. The properties really surrounding to the north and to the left are zoned R4. Majority of the lots that are to the south of the street potentially could be annexed into the city and would match the R4 zoning regulations, and that is what's being proposed for the parcels. In terms of the existing properties, as we mentioned, upon annexation, the address will be changed to 160 Pine Lane. It will be just one single lot. Once combined, the size of the property will be a little bit over 13,000 square feet. And as I mentioned before, currently the lots are vacant. Staff believes that the proposal would meet the goals of the comprehensive plan. More specifically, there is a mention of supporting of annexations into the city. More so, the parcels are designated as single family on the future land use map. So that is definitely in conformance with the comprehensive plan. In terms of the UDO, as you may recall, we've had a couple of requests like this over the last few months. Upon annexation into the city, the properties are automatically zoned R1, which is our most restrictive residential zoning. So the petitioners are seeking to rezone it to R4 to allow the construction of the single-family home that they're looking for. And the lots are currently vacant, but under the existing UDO regulations, they would fall under the building type 4 typology and the requirements in terms of setbacks and so on. So to recap, staff is recommending that CDC recommend approval of the lot consolidation and rezoning of the two subject properties. Thank you.
Any members of the CDC have any questions for staff?
We are going to stay at 40% coverage on that?
That is correct, yes, and that all will be handled through the building permit process. As of right now, the property owners have not submitted a permit yet, obviously.
Okay.
Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this zoning matter? Okay, and I'll put out a last call for any questions of the CDC. All right, there being no further questions, I recommend a motion to close the public hearing on this matter.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, Marilyn, can we have a roll call on that?
Yes. Mr. Babowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Ochoa?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Shemanek?
Yes.
Ms. Zadko?
Yes.
And Mr. Woods?
Yes.
Okay, so the public hearing portion of this matter has been closed. Now we're proceeding to deliberations. So this is the portion where CDC members will deliberate this particular request. Are there any further comments on this request? Okay, there being no further comments, I will read a recommended motion. If you are in favor of this proposal, you would vote yes. If you are not in favor of this proposal, you would vote no. Okay, and here is the recommended motion. Based on the submitted petition and the testimony presented, the proposed lot consolidation and map amendment rezoning is consistent with the Unified Development Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan, and therefore I move that the Community Development Commission adopt the findings of fact included within the staff memo dated April 18th, 2022, as the findings of the Community Development Commission, and recommend to the City Council approval of lot consolidation and map amendment rezoning for 5 North 510 and 5 North 514 North Pine Lane, to be known as 160 Pine Lane, in case number CDC 2022-0001. Anybody make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Who was the second? I'm sorry.
Member Saxco.
Thank you. Okay, a roll. Mr. Babowitz.
Yes.
Mr. Ochoa.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Shemanik.
Yes.
Ms. Zatko.
Yes.
And Mr. Woods.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. And Gosha, will that proceed, do you know when that's going to proceed to committee?
That is I do not know the date yet, but definitely we'll be in touch. I will contact the applicant to let them know when the following meetings will be.
So folks, the CDC has recommended approval to the city council, so the next step will be for the city council to consider your proposal. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's call tonight's second matter, which is CDC 2022-02. This case was continued from last month and involves the City of Wooddale's proposal for a comprehensive rewrite of the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 17 of the Wooddale Municipal Code, and map amendment rezoning of properties located in the city. So I just kind of want to briefly go over the procedure that we're going to follow with this follow-up meeting. What we're going to do is we're going to have staff and the city's consultants address some of the concerns that were raised at the last meeting. They will do that. Then what we're going to do is we are going to go through each article, and the Community Development Commission members will have their opportunity to ask staff and consultants any questions they have as to each article. So we'll go through that. And then once we're completed with that process, we'll open it up to the public for any public comment or statements. And we'll go from there. We'll do it just like that. Okay, so we'll start with the staff. Yes?
Can I step up real quick?
No, we're going to start with staff.
But can we maybe break it up for the public comment, where if you do a section, we can allow the public to do it afterwards?
No, this is the process that we're going to do. So what I would recommend
We're
is
going to be
make,
circling all the way back to the beginning. then.
right, so you can make notes and we'll get to you after the staff and the CDC members have had an opportunity to ask their questions. Okay. Okay.
So I'll just wanted to briefly start. I know at the last public hearing, the direction from CDC was to split the articles or split the UDO into two parts. So upon conversations after the meeting, staff decided to discuss Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, 4, and 7. So as you notice, obviously, we are skipping over Article 5 and 6. Those two articles are the landscaping regulations and parking regulations. We thought that those would be okay or fine to leave it for the subsequent meeting, mainly because Article 7 that I was really hoping we can get to today, those are the non-conforming regulations, and they really go hand in hand with Article 4, which are the land uses, the zoning districts, and so on. So that was one of the reasons why the decision was made to group the articles the way we did. So as it was noted, the intent for today is really to go through the articles one by one and get the feedback as we're going. And with that, I'll ask our consultants to do a little bit of an overview of our last meeting and some of the issues and items that were raised up.
Thank you.
you, Goshen. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, nice to see you again this lovely spring night. We just wanted to take a minute and kind of take stock of where we are and share some thoughts about the discussion we had last time, so that as we go through the sections that Goshen noted, we can all kind of be on the same page here. Again, just a couple of things. I'll talk about some of the land use aspects of it, and David will talk about some of the non-conforming and other issues that came up. But just by way of overview, and we're summarizing what was the memo that was in the packet. But just to touch on all that for those who haven't seen it, the general idea of updating the UDO really came out of three ideas. One was to make it more user-friendly. Again, as a reminder, adding graphics and tables and having key sections stand out so that they're easier to find. Making the UDO more user and business-friendly so that day-to-day operations were clearer, the kind of code aspects that reflect or that affect businesses would be easier to find, and also to provide some flexibility for the development administrator on challenging parcels as they came through the site plan process. And third was to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, which the city updated in 2017. The comprehensive plan is directly updated by changes to the zoning ordinance. Some of the biggest challenges, again, just to kind of reiterate from last time in terms of updating the code or where the UDO has been, the version that we have now, the current UDO, is based on a form-based zoning approach. And without getting into the depths of the way zoning works, it's not a traditional based on bulk and land use kind of approach that people are very familiar with zoning. It's based more on just the bulk, not so much the use. And frankly, the UDO right now is a bit of a hybrid, kind of jumps between the two, makes it hard to use, makes it hard for users, for designers, business owners, property owners, residents to make sense of. And frankly, the city has been kind of using the PUD process to rather effectively go around those challenges. So the idea of the update is to kind of take some of that away and make it easier for folks to use. In terms of some of the things that came up last time, just to summarize some of the points that we highlighted then, in terms of land use, there was a lot of concern and a lot of very good discussion about the uses along Potter Street on the north side of the area that's currently zoned industrial, which is proposed to be C3, a commercial district under the updated UDO. And there were a lot of questions or a lot of mention of how this change goes from 121 permitted uses to 6. And it is a big jump and it is a big change. But just a couple things to keep in mind as we continue that conversation tonight. The question is not just about permitted and special uses from a quantitative sense, but from a qualitative sense. All right, so the idea was to look not just at how many, but how do they affect people. And part of the challenge of that area is that there are residents, there are homes right across the street from there, and that the idea was to find the balance there. The other thing to keep in mind is that one of the changes that's made in the UDO is to create use categories rather than specific uses. So there's actually more than 6 permitted uses, or even special uses, because they're in categories rather than uses. A lot of what was permitted uses are now set up as special uses. And the reason is because, again, they're across from residential. The idea of the special use, for those who aren't as familiar with the zoning process as you all are, is that a proposed development or proposed use that's a special use would come before you and ultimately the city council for approval, and would enable you and council to put conditions on it, which might be about outdoor storage, it might be about hours of operation and that sort of thing, all geared towards mitigating any potential adverse impacts of the folks who live across the street. And again, those would be conditions that the city could set on a case-by-case basis. The most particular reason, the most important reason to change the zoning there from I-1 is that I-1, again, is the same zoning district that regulates the industrial areas at the north side of town, right? So the idea that a small an area with small lots that's in town would be regulated with the same set of regulations as is for the industrial park is really kind of incongruous. It's just not appropriate. The bottom line here is that evaluating the changes to the land use, the permitted and special uses in the C3 is really not a quantitative question, it's a qualitative one. And it's really about which of those particular uses is appropriate, and that would be a great way to look at it. We talked too a lot about Irving Park Road, those C1, C2, C2A districts that are referenced in there. C1 and C2, of course, already existing. The distinctions there are based on a couple of different things. One was the size of the lots, right? So C2 you can think of as being where Target is, right? Those are larger lots. C1 is more along the lines of the lots that are on the north side, the north side of Irving Park Road and the east end of town. These are smaller lots. So the kinds of activities, the proximity to residential, all creates a different type of appropriate land use. Again, same sort of thing. Considering which uses are appropriate there should be a function of thinking through the individual uses and whether or not it's appropriate that they're on Irving Park Road and their proximity to residential and such. The final land use issue that we spent time having good discussion on last time was about the overlays, right? So the Thorndale Corridor overlay we did not talk so much about, but that's going to remain unchanged from the amendments that were done just in 2020. The other overlay that's listed is the intersection overlay, which is an implementation tool of the comprehensive plan. And it's really designed to encourage unique, large-scale gateway development. You may recall that the current zoning UDO and the previous plan talked about corporate Main Street, and this idea of taking advantage of the Thorndale Corridor, turning into more of a highway cross-section to attract more large-scale activity and better development, or larger scale development. And that's certainly the intent with the interchange overlay. Because that development now focuses around interchange, and there's lots of examples around the region, and those really came out of the comprehensive plan. So from a land use perspective, that's just kind of a little bit of the background on where the thinking was in terms of some of the issues that raised questions last week. And I'll turn it, or last meeting, I apologize. I'll turn it over to David to talk about some of the others.
So with the non-conforming use provisions are your safety valve to avoid takings of land and property when you go through a process like this. Every zoning code has these types of sections, and in many ways they're drafted in a similar way, and they're well tested under law. But obviously these raise a lot of concerns for existing property owners, so we wanted to address some of the specific concerns, as Michael just did with the uses and zoning, specific to the non-conforming use chapter. At the last meeting on the 21st, there was a lot of discussion about the 90-day abandonment clause. As I clarified toward the end of the last public hearing, or I should say the first public hearing, that is in fact in there, but that only pertains to use of land, not use of buildings. So in the instance of use of buildings, non-conforming use of buildings, it's 1 year. If it's abandoned for 1 year, then anything that subsequently goes into it must be conforming to the district. Consideration was raised at the meeting as to whether the owner of a non-conforming business or other use could sell that property and have the non-conforming use continue. As I explained at the meeting, as currently drafted, that would not be allowed, but this is a policy decision, and you're going to hear that a lot from us. All of these are policy decisions. We make recommendations. They're policy considerations for the Plan Commission to consider and make recommendations to the City Council on. Your zoning code grows out of your comprehensive plan, which is the base policy document. These are the laws that put the policies into effect. But again, these are just things you have to determine for yourself. We base our recommendations on good practice and what we do in other communities that serve those communities well, and that we know are well and legally tested. So you're going to hear that's a policy decision a few times tonight. Questions were raised as to whether a building destroyed by fire or other disaster beyond 50% of its value could be restored. They can be restored, but must become conforming to the code if they're destroyed in excess of 50% of the appraised valuation. If it's less, then it can be restored as it was in its non-conforming state. It can't be expanded, the non-conformity can't be expanded, but it can be restored as it was immediately preceding the loss. There was also some questions as to whether uses that were formerly permitted uses that would become special uses under the draft UDO could automatically gain that status. Yes, you can do that if you want, insofar as there would be a concern on process, because ordinarily you'd have to have a public hearing for special uses in the first place. This is the public hearing. So if you're going to do it, you're doing it here. But you could set that up. We could certainly draft provisions that way. Yeah, okay, so then also, can you convey non-conforming status to subsequent owners or lessees? As currently drafted, you can't. But again, a policy decision could be made that makes a lot of sense in Wooddale. So if that's where you think that should go, certainly that's your prerogative. And then other items that were discussed that could address some of the concerns that were raised, and certainly there's a lot, and we'll probably hear some more tonight, you could expand the situations where the development administrator can grant administrative waivers from the non-conforming regulations, which would then avoid them having to go through any extra process. They would have to talk to the development administrator, and the development administrator, based on objective factors that we could design, would have to look at the situation to see if it falls within his or her jurisdiction. And then outside of that, you could delegate more authority to the CDC to grant variations from the non-conforming regulations. Again, the good thing about zoning is it's unique to each community. And you have a lot of latitude under the Illinois statutes to design regulations that serve the city's interests, the property owner's interests. The one thing we would emphasize is those regulations should align with the goals and objectives of your comprehensive plan. The two should not be divorced from each other. They complement one another, and they work together. So that's on the non-conforming. Michael?
That's all. We just wanted to run through that as a summary, Mr. Chair, so we thank you for that opportunity.
Okay, so what we're going to do, well, I should say this. Before we start going through each article, are there any questions that the CDC has for the consultants just based on their sort of introduction presentation? Okay, so why don't we just move through the articles here, and we'll start with Article 1. This is title, purpose, and definitions. And I'll put this out to the CDC. Are there any members who have any particular questions about Article 1 for the consultants or for staff?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Page 18, under junkyard. The second paragraph, does that mean if you meet the second paragraph, you succeed in meeting the definition of a junkyard? I mean, the second sentence. So if I have 2 or more inoperable motor vehicles stored on a zoning lot, shall be considered a junkyard. That's a statement. So if I have 2 inoperable vehicles, then therefore I have a junkyard. So I'm thinking that needs to be rephrased somehow. Within your definitions, I did not see anything that addressed if there was a animal crematorium within the city limits. Was there something within the definitions that did that?
There was not specifically, no.
Okay, and the concern there is that there could possibly be, based upon the unincorporated one, that could be in the area. So that needs to be considered. I'm taking the assumption that supported living is considered to be under everything that's considered. You have 3 different areas where you define congregate care or skilled nursing or licensed care. So I'm assuming all those areas, when you combine them, somehow they cover all of the areas that are considered within the state of Illinois' regulations for licensed nursing facilities, whether it be supportive care, skilled care, acute care, whatever it's labeled. Is that fair to state or no?
Yeah, in terms of their land use impact, in terms of zoning, everything that is pretty much the continuum of care, primarily for seniors, but also for disabled and such not, and such as folks who have disabilities and such, is all under-skilled care. Because from a zoning perspective, they're the same. What's different are the group homes, community homes kind of things, which are specifically state regulated. That's the distinction you were talking about. Excuse me, and they're covered in here.
Okay, and I was specifically thinking of areas like supported living, which is still a licensed category, which still should be covered there.
Okay.
I basically want to defer to whatever the state of Illinois requires
Match the state with.
yeah, whatever requires a licensure for, that then we require it as well. We include it in our definition. Other than that, that's all I had.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the CDC concerning Article 1? Okay. Let's move on to Article 2, Zoning Administration and Enforcement. That starts on page 35. Does any CDC member have a particular question about Article 2, which starts on page 35?
I have a question for you, and it might include staff, so you might have to have that included. We have various, it shows in there how you address PUDs and how they are, I want to say, not monitored, but how they're created, how they're established, and what has to be followed. Is there anything in there that shows or gives us information if a PUD is created for specifically an HOA within, an HOA is within the PUD. So that HOA has to follow whatever the PUD has. But the HOA changes their rules. Does the city have do they have any responsibility to report to the city the changes in the rules for the HOA that affects the PUD?
We're going to you on this one. That's a great
Yeah, that's
question,
fine.
though.
So what we did add is HOA requirements, which included voting requirements to amend the bylaws for the association.
Right, you did do that, but
But
you
not
did
specific.
You did not state that the
That's true.
city has to be notified of anything.
That is true.
So for example, I have a PUD for an HOA. My HOA decides, I don't need 50% brick anymore. I'm gonna do 20% brick. And I don't have to tell the city once I get it fixed, once I do that, once we vote on it. So then when no one looks at the PUD and no one knows what the HOA is, you guys just okay at the city whatever's out there. Because you don't know that the new amendments for the HOA show that it should be 25%, but it should really be 50. You were never notified of the change.
They're still subject to the zoning, aren't they?
They're still yeah, so, right. In some instances, they would be tied to whatever the design requirements are, the zoning, specific zoning requirements are. But to get to your point, no, if they change that, something like that, the design aspect of the buildings, no, there would not be, there's nothing in there right now. It certainly could be added, not a bad idea. Really what communities are often concerned about with HOAs is not taking care of the common areas and common ownership property. And so what the regulations we put in there are really focused on is that, enabling the city to go onto the property to make the repairs and then charging the HOA for its costs that it incurred to do that, but not something like what you're bringing up.
And I only could say this because I know it's happened in the city.
Okay.
So that's something that I think that somehow we need to figure out how to monitor that.
Sure.
So if I may add, actually, we had internal conversations, so not really part of the UDO discussion, but this is something that has come up in the Community Development Department, and there most likely will be a text amendment to Chapter 12, which governs our building permits, and that's where the connection between homeowner requirements, homeowner association requirements will be named, but ultimately it is a local restriction so ultimately it will be on the the permit applicant to show us that the HOA approves whatever modifications or whatever he's trying to do. So we're trying to build in a process where we do look at that, but ultimately, as a city, we're not always, we don't always have the authority to enforce a lot of these things.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions as to Article 2? Okay.
Can I just address one thing? The city does in fact have a right to enforce the covenants. So that is, so there is a mechanism in there on that, but again, not specific to an amendment. Now, one question I have, when a developer does the city attorney review the CCRs for a community typically as part of the process, just as part of the standard process? Okay.
No.
All right, well, we'll make sure we'll add something in there about that. I think
Right.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I don't think there's currently any control over, how do you say that? Oversight over that type of area currently.
Okay.
But it's required by the city to have the PUD for the HOA, and that can change, and no one knows.
Okay. Any other questions on Article 2? All right, moving along to Article 3, General Provisions. That starts on page 84. Any questions, comments from the CDC on Article 3? Okay, moving along to Article 4, Development Districts. This starts on page 118. Any questions or comments from the CDC for our staff or consultants? Okay. All right, and then I think we're going up to Article 7. Article 7. This is the non-conforming lots, buildings, structures, and uses article, and it begins on page 188. Any questions, comments, statements from the CDC about Article 7? Okay. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the hearing for the public comment statements as to any of the articles that we've just gone through, also as to any of the introductory statements that the consultants or staff have made. What I'd like to do is, just by a show of hands, how many folks would like to make a public comment tonight? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have all of you stand. Our consultants were previously sworn in. Some of you may have, I don't know who has or who hasn't. So could everybody just stand, raise your right hand to be sworn in, please?
And
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, would each of you state your name? They will state their names and addresses, please. If you have not been sworn in at the previous meeting.
You know, Marilyn, what we'll do is just give them the oath, and then they can say their name and address when they approach the podium.
Okay. Do you, each of you, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, and then when you step to the podium, you could tell me your name and address, please.
Thank you, folks. Did you want to take a break? Okay, you said you should do a short recess. You can, well, folks, we're just going to take a short 2-minute recess. If anybody needs to use the washroom, Washrooms are right out in the hallway, about 2 or 3 minute recess.
Is the temperature okay? So I know, we got warm. Sure.
The elimination of the non-conforming uses, that's going to, on a sale, that's going away. You said you can't sell. What I said was, as it currently drafted, you couldn't convey the non-conforming status. But what I explained was the city can make a policy decision that it wants to. Property, but once the ownership of the property transfers, we would interpret that as changing the. That's fine. I'm agnostic about it, so whatever they want. He had some of the most sardonic lyrics of anyone. This is how I told you about it. You're waiting for it. She literally, she's not very healthy to begin with, and she was really obese. She and her husband ended up with cancer. All right, folks, we are going to resume
So now we are at the portion where members of the public have been sworn in and have the opportunity to provide your comments, questions for the consultants. So is there somebody who would like to make a comment? Sir, will you please approach the podium?
My name is Bruce Larson, Larsen. I'm a resident of Schiller Park, 3844 North 25th Avenue. I'm representing our family's building at 385 to 395 East Potter Street in Wooddale. Our building was established there in the early 1960s. I wanted to ask if there will be a copy of the sign-in sheets for these meetings included in the published minutes.
So typically, the sign-in sheets are not included in the published minutes, but they are public record, so that you are able to submit an information request to the city.
Okay,
Okay, and then they can evaluate that under the FOIA laws.
all right. Going further, adoption of this draft UDO would change our building from a legal conforming status to a legal non-conforming status. If I may read a portion of section 17703, and I'm quoting, elimination of non-conforming structures and uses. In accordance with section 17706 and the exceptions set forth in section 17705 of this article, it is hereby declared to be the intent of the city to eliminate non-conforming uses and structures, end quote. I cannot find the section 17.706 referenced here and ask if there is actually any section 17.706.
Those are obviously an error. The process to, that is the general policy of the city based on how this is currently drafted. And it would basically be the entirety of this chapter that we're looking at. That was an errant reference and should have been removed when we did the edits for this meeting. I apologize for the confusion.
Well, I don't know how we figure out how to be in accordance with 17.706 if it doesn't exist.
Right, and I'm saying that was an errant reference that should have been removed.
I see. The quoted section also clearly states that the goal of this UDO and the new status of our building, if this UDO is adopted, for any future or current staff or elected representative, as in being the elimination of our building and its uses by any means available to them to achieve the goal the city has set, and that should be their mission according to this document. That's just a statement of fact. That's what it says. You want us gone. Next, I'd like to ask, is it Mr. Blue from the engineering firm?
Yes.
How exactly were the permitted uses for zoning district C3 determined? Was there some scientific method applied?
As I sort of introduced before, the idea was to look at the existing list of uses, remove the ones that were just generally large and I-1 oriented, and then to focus on the types of uses that are generally more compatible with the uses across the street, with the residential uses. So it was a qualitative, not a quantitative aspect, and it's certainly something that's open to review. A lot of these questions are, as David pointed out earlier, policy decisions for the city.
Was there any type of comparison with other municipalities with similar circumstances as they developed, showing the need for these uses?
There's a couple questions in there. One, the need for the uses was certainly something that was taken into account. There was not an effort to change it to a residential district, which was an option, right? All business uses could have been eliminated. That was not the intent. In terms of looking at other communities, we really didn't. It's built on our collective experience, the experience of staff here in town, to try and make a thoughtful decision of what could be changed there. All towns are different. Nobody's going to have exactly the same situation.
And lastly, do you agree that the change in zoning to District C3 for our Potter Street area is to further the goal of eliminating our building and non-conforming structures by designating our property as non-conforming?
Again, there's kind of two separate things going on there. The idea of the C3 is to have a district where there is a set of uses that are a reasonable balance of a match for what's across the street. To the extent that some of those may be non-conforming, that over time that they not be replaced and that they become something else, that's, as David said, part of the non-conforming section, yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask the committee to recommend against adoption of the proposal as it's written and to request that the city council have the UDO rewritten to conform to the real world uses for properties in the city, both in my little area and the city as a whole. Thank the committee members for attention to this issue.
Thank you, sir.
Can I just add one thing? The current UDO actually has that same statement that he's concerned about. Section 17303 of your current UDO, 17303A reads, elimination of nonconforming structures and uses. In accordance with the authority granted to municipality for the elimination of nonconforming uses and structures, it is hereby declared to be the intent of the city to eliminate said uses and structures except as otherwise allowed by this chapter. So it's already in there. We modified the language a bit, but your policy intent still is there. That's your current code.
Go ahead, sir.
I would like to start by saying,
Your
my
name,
family,
please,
oh,
sir?
my name's Roger Dickens. I live in
Roger?
Addison. Roger Dickens,
Dickens.
yes. We have the airport, Wooddale, the airport in Wooddale, Dickens Foods, and also White Glove Janitorial Service and Sanitation Chemicals. We love it here in Wooddale. We've had great experiences. My family's been here for over 40 years. We also understand that times do change. We have buildings in other countries now. Several other states offer us great things to move there and be part of their expansions in communities. That being said, it's our home base. I live in Addison. My mom lives in Addison. She's 80 years old, still comes to work every day. We enjoy it here. But by what you're doing, this is going to change our dynamic. Those buildings aren't going to be worth what they were. It's just not going to happen. By changing it down, our uses, our long-term plans, it's just not available. Like I said, and being part of the community and loving the community as we do, it's hard to accept these changes would come. But with progress, we understand. And if that's what you'd like to do, at least offer to buy us out, because our buildings are going to be worth a fraction of what they were, especially with an economic downturn, which we all know we're going to be facing shortly. Hyperinflation, food shortages, gas increases, it's all on the horizon. The things that sound beautiful, what they want to do, is not going to be feasible because big buildings aren't going to be buying it here in a few days, a few months. You need to take those things into consideration, because the only thing that's going to be able to sustain in the community is us that's been here for 40, 50 years. Smaller businesses to keep things going. Food crisis is coming up. We have fertilizer companies. We moved them out of the state. Food crisis coming up. We have grows where we build shelters for sustainable growth. We don't build them here in Wooddale. We build them out of state. We do a prototype here, goes out. So we basically do our R&D here. So we've already chased those things and those dollars out of the area. By what we're proposing, it's just going to take more. Or we could have all those things right here. And with what he's proposing, there's no way. But thank you very much, and we appreciate your time. And we would just like to know how to move forward, where to move forward before our buildings are worth 30% of what they were. And I would love to know as a community, with an economic downturn, how these plans are even feasible, because all you're gonna have is empty lots. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Mr. Dickens, your address, please, in Wooddale?
356 East Irving.
356
East
East
Irving.
Irving? Okay,
And also Potter, I believe it's 340 to 346.
346 Potter.
342.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Lou Madsen. I live in Medina, Illinois, 403 East Potter Street,
Would you spell your last name, please?
Matson.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback on some of the other comments, and the main concern is the use. And when I received the use letter from the engineer from the city, there were 6 uses now for our property. 5 of them I've never seen in our community before. I've been in the neighborhood for 25 years now. The only one that is on the list is contractor. I'm a contractor, and the building was primarily used for that until the downturn of the economy in 2009. It's become a rental property. I still maintain a small portion of the building to run my business, but I was wondering if someone could define what a contractor business or contractor office is and what that would look like for use of the building and the yard space.
We're all scrolling.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes, ma'am.
Your address of your business?
403 East Potter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Contractor's office.
Could you read it? Yes, because I can't get there.
That is defined as an office for uses that provides off-site services for construction, maintenance, and repair of building structures, equipment, or other services. This use may also include storage of equipment and materials.
Okay, so we can still maintain the use of the yard space for connexes, trailers with pieces of equipment that we use for every day doing our businesses, and all those regular things, sundry items that are part of being a commercial, industrial, electrical contracting firm.
Well, this is specific to the office use.
Right, but
not the yard.
okay, but see, the building without the yard, they're together, so you haven't addressed the yard.
What's the outdoor storage section?
That's the outdoor storage, right, that's outdoor
Yeah.
storage. So you'd be subject to screening requirements and things like that, but,
Behind the fence.
yeah,
Right. But as long as it's behind the fence, we can still maintain
accounted
our
for.
regular business.
yes.
That's our biggest concern with regard to that. And then just out of curiosity, how did they choose the other 5, bakery, broadcast studio? How does that relate to, it just seems, I guess the only word I can think of is, it doesn't make sense.
Sure, I hear you. Some of those were in the code already, like that broadcast studio thing's in the code now. Didn't know if there was one, but so it's in there now. A lot of the retail ones were carried over, but carried over as special uses, just to be able to regulate them in terms of time of operation. Nobody would start open too early, be open too late to bother the neighborhoods. So that was the kind of thought that went through it.
Okay, so it can be a contractor's office, yard space is still in place, so that, we're not losing that ability for that piece of property.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Sir?
Mr. Chair, one more time, just while the gentleman's coming up. About Potter, if we're going to hear about Potter, I just want to put a little bit of context for everybody. This is, I guess, one more time, this is a policy decision, right? At the one end, it could stay as it is. On the other hand, it could be zoned residential, right? So there's the absolute opposites. Somewhere in between there as it relates to the types of uses that are permitted, the types of uses that are special uses, and the types of uses that would be non-conforming and the non-conforming rules that apply. There's an answer in there, right? And there was one provided as a draft as an idea. These are, as David indicated, policy decisions. So I appreciate what everybody's saying. I encourage you to hear it and kind of figure out the best place for us to draw that line. Is that kind of... Again, my point is, this is why we have public hearings, and we encourage you to kind of find that balance in there, and we can all work together and sort that out.
Can I respond to something that the chairman said?
Hold on, sir. We're taking this one at a time. We have a gentleman who has
If he
approached the
got
podium.
something that's relevant, I can yield to him if he wants to.
That's fine, if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, I'll-
Okay. Would you like to
Can
make
I
a
just
follow-up?
respond to something?
Yeah, can you approach the podium, please,
The
sir?
attorney said after I finished testifying, in relation to what I testified, he stated that the existing city code has a non-conforming use section. But that's not the question we're talking about here. I understand the city always had a non-conforming use section. What we're talking about here is changing our status from conforming to non-conforming. Whether the city had a non-conforming status before doesn't really affect us at this point.
Thank you, sir. Sir, go ahead.
Your name, please?
Hi, Stephen Jamrozik, Jamrozik, and properties
I'm sorry, J-A-M,
Rozik,
thank you.
and properties located at, Stephen with a V,
Thank you.
390 East Irving Park Road.
Thank you.
Something that I thought about the last time I was here, my main argument was no matter what you think about the plan, the timing is wrong. And gentleman from White Glove and the airport, he put it pretty succinctly. A few years ago, Wooddale was buying up properties if they wanted to, convert the uses, and I mentioned Ready Electric the last time I talked. As far as I'm aware of, or when I spoke with someone with the city, you're not doing that anymore. And if you had faith in this plan, or if the plan was working as predicted, you'd still be doing it. It just seems like if I hate to be that colloquial about it, but put your money where your mouth is. I mean, if you think it's a great plan, then free up some funds for people. If not, it just seems kind of hypocritical to force us to shoulder the burden of a vision of what Wooddale might be in 10 years based on plans that were drawn up 5 years ago. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Carrie Savickas, and the address is for 229 North Central in Wooddale.
And would you spell your last name, please?
Savickas.
Thank you.
Unlike the properties on Potter, I don't have residential by my property. But I do want to make this a part of this meeting because when we were here last week, or last time, I had mentioned, and now a couple people had brought up the exact thing that I wanted to talk about, is the devaluing of our properties. I had mentioned when I was here last that I am responsible, we're in a partnership on that building, and so I have other people that I have to answer to. And at the time, right prior to getting our letter, I had signed a listing agreement to put the property on the market because, again, I'm going according to other people that are involved in the property. 2 days later, I got the letter from the village that we're having this down zoning. I really wasn't understanding it, so anyways, to make a long story short, I have 2 emails that I'm going to read, so that's on the record, because now we've talked about devaluing. So my agent actually canceled my listing listing because of these reasons. He said, "Thank you, Carrie. What the village said makes sense." Now, this is March 18th. We listed it February 28th. What the village said makes sense. The primary concern is that the buyer pool for an industrial sale leaseback retail development will be extremely limited. After discussing with our retail team further, it will be a challenging redevelopment because there is limited frontage on Irving Park Road. We can discuss further on the phone if you're available. Well, that was on the 18th. As he went into looking more, because now my property was going to be sold industrial. He was very hot and heavy about getting this done because of the fact there's a lot of people looking to do 1031 exchanges for industrial properties. He has investors all over the world. And they, well, whatever 1031s do, but that's what his specific was. That changed. That was a big deal because he can't bring those types of buyers in, industrial buyers in. And again, I'm limited on explaining this, but the next email I got was for the termination of the listing, and this was March 23rd. Carrie, please see the attached addendum to the representation agreement for your property at 229 North Central. As you and I discussed, with the zoning possibly changing to commercial, this will significantly impact the value and marketing strategy for your property. My advice would be to terminate the listing and reevaluate the situation once the village makes a final determination for the zoning. Please let me know if you have any questions. So we did terminate. So again, when I came, I said, I really appreciate what the village is doing, and I understand these two gentlemen are just given a project, so they're working on a project for the city. So what I'm coming to say to you people that are doing this planning, as I mentioned at the last meeting, and this other gentleman mentioned it, what you're proposing, which started, and I understand things take a long time, we're not in that day anymore, unfortunately, after what's gone on in the world. And I agree with this gentleman. I believe your proposal plan for all these property changes are going to be minimum 10 years. And I can only say that because I'm familiar with Wooddale. I've heard the other plans you've had. And again, I appreciate what you're doing. I know what you're trying to do and strive for. We have gone through so many glitches here in Wooddale. And it's unfortunate, but I think other towns have had those types of setbacks too. So I'm coming to you for today. Other people have businesses. I can move my business somewhere else. It's going to be very expensive. I have been offered to stay in my building. But for the other people involved, that's not what they want. So my problem is immediate. And so now already, I have a realtor telling me my property value has gone down from what it was February 28th, before this came up. So I just wanted to make a point of that. I don't know how this will all work out for everybody, and again, I just thought it would be appropriate to make it a point, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, everybody. My name is Beth Nelson, Bethnelson. Our property is at 310 West Irving Park Road. I followed Carrie the last time. I'll follow her again. One of the questions, there was many questions we've had over this. Looking at the maps, I see where, I still have no idea how any of these properties were picked to be rezoned, because some are going down from C2 to C1, and they're along Irving Park Road, and then other ones over here are going up from C1 to C2. When we first purchased our property, it was zoned residential, and it was changed to C1, which didn't impact any existing use of the property. When I've talked to Gosha, she made it clear today, or when she responded, I'm sorry, that C1, this is from her email, I don't know where she's quoting any of these regulations or anything like that, but she says, as noted, your property will be upzoned from C1, which is intended for smaller properties that serve the neighborhood, which is what we are and what we have been, to C2, which is intended for larger lots that serve a greater regional area. Our lot hasn't changed in size. We're still small community. We're still of the neighborhood type. So I don't understand how you could call it something else now. As everyone has said, the environment has changed. Many people want to live close to stores, we have Jewel, we have Target, we have restaurants. Where we are, we can walk to those places. Why wouldn't you want that type of residential that could walk to those places? Many communities have gone towards that. Elmhurst is a big one. I really have no idea. Again, I've asked specifically, what is the zoning, what is changing the zoning going to achieve? I've heard no plans. I asked specifically, is there people who are looking to move into Wooddale to redevelop? And I have nothing. I get nowhere. No one knows of any place, any businesses, any retail establishments, any developments that would redevelop these blocks to improve the area or change the area. So if there is something, where do I find that information? Because I'm trying to figure out, what are you going for here? Does anyone have any answer? Sure.
Just to give everybody an idea what the logic was, right? Between C1 and C2, a lot of the uses are similar. If you hold the table up to each other, the things that are larger are not going to be typically permitted in the C1. The idea of rezoning that end of Irving Park Road where your property is sort of inspired by the 7-Eleven and the gas station, the AT&T store that happened down there, which is an example of somebody putting together property, getting a property that's a little bit larger, and putting something that generates more revenue for property owners and generates some sales tax for the community. The theory is that over time there would be interested developers who would come and look to put together your property and others to do that sort of thing, right? And so to the extent that the use that's going on here is still permitted, it doesn't change what you can do, but what it does is it encourages that if there's going to be development, redevelopment, just to be clear. Somebody coming, paying you fair market value for your property, putting it together with some others, and making one of these larger developments happen. So that's kind of probably the best example is what happened right on the corner at Addison.
But we have none of those interested parties. We've gotten letters in the past, and right now the environment is, as Carrie just said, this is just not the environment.
And I hear that, and it's an excellent point, and it's a great question generally about zoning, and that zoning looks forward. Zoning looks to encourage this going forward. What happens till then gets to be the question, and that's the question that you and your neighbors are asking, and we understand that. But the idea is that over time, that's what the ordinance is trying to encourage.
Okay, one final comment regarding that is, why wouldn't you just wait to change the zoning later when you have interested parties? What would be the difference of doing it now or doing it later? When the development presents itself. Yeah, I understand foresight, I really do. I understand a lot of foresight. I personally wish that all of you would not go for this change. You know, again, I'm not familiar. It was really hard to look at this map. I can't drive around and look at all these properties. It's just random to me. It's just, you pick this block here and this block over here, and I just don't see any continuity. But again, I don't have any background. And I've been looking for background, and I'm really not finding it of why. There's no planning notes, there's no, nothing for the city that I can find.
And it's a fair question. Have you looked at the comprehensive plan?
I did.
Okay, that was the right place to start, thank you. In general, I would tell you the distinction between the C1, the C2, and even the C2A is about how big the property is and what the potential is, right? So some of those C1 properties that are generally more towards the east end of Irving Park Road, they just don't have the potential that even putting them together, right? And so things that are larger, like the example that comes to mind is home improvement stores over 100,000 square feet, I think is in there. That ain't ever gonna happen, right? On a C1 park at the east end of town. But as you get to a larger lot, more things can happen. So that's the reasoning. So even if you don't look at it and it creates confusion, because I understand back and forth, but that was the logic that was applied to it.
Okay. Just one more final comment. There are a lot of empty properties in town, a lot. There's empty buildings, empty storefronts, empty lots. I just don't understand why you would change the existing zoning for some of these people and drive them out. Thank you.
ma'am. Any other members of the public? Sir?
My name's John Florina, Florina, 415 East Irving Park Road. I represent the six-unit apartment building, multi-unit dwelling. I was here at the meeting in March, and I spoke as well. I don't have a lot of new things to offer, but I did want to make sure it was clear that it wasn't just the C3s that were of interest or of concern. As the woman spoke a few minutes ago, C1s and C2s. My particular property is being downzoned from a C2 to a C1, the opposite of yours, okay? But what I'd like to do, since there was a brief set of minutes, it didn't in any way reflect that there was other zoning classes other than the Potter Street, what was it, S3, C3, whatever, C3. We didn't have any record, as far as I could tell, in the minutes. So I'd like to resubmit the letter I submitted to you back on March 17th, which pointed out my concerns.
Thank you.
The letter should be in the record, but I want to make sure my comments are in the record, since they didn't seem to be in the
And sir,
minutes.
just not to interrupt you, but these proceedings are also being recorded, so there's a recorded record of it as
Good.
well.
Good. I don't know if everybody has access to just go back and listen to the
I think
minutes.
they're
from-
either posted on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, probably, I'm glad to know that. It's probably hard to find what you're looking for if you got to sit there for hours and listen to people like me, okay? So, anyway, I just want to make sure the letter was there. I just want to highlight the objections I had to the proposal that was being put forward and is still being put forward. The issue we have is there is no classification anymore for our building. Okay, and going into this, the whole concept of non-conforming structure, C1 for a dwelling unit or multi-dwelling unit or a multi-dwelling unit with a business on the first floor is not listed in the table, the table of uses for the property. So at this point, if the proposal goes through, it looks like I don't have for the use of my property anything within your zoning code that says I exist. Now, I know I've been told that we would continue to exist because we're there. But if at some point in the future, we lose half of the use of our building, or over time, I think one of the gentlemen that was here last time talked about the amortization process of buildings being able to be used over time in this whole non-conforming prospect. I don't know where we set. And I did ask, why don't we have our apartment building listed in the tables, in the uses in that table? I don't know where we're at, okay? So makes it sound like if this gets passed, I don't exist, I shouldn't be there, and tomorrow or the day after that something will occur to remove my business and the housing that I provide for 6 different families. So the objections, and I'll just summarize them, not to go through everything I talked about before, but the downzoning of the existing contiguous properties on the east end of Irving Park Road, north side, and I believe there's 8 of them. Properties further west it would be Hemlock, I believe, are not affected by this, okay? As a matter of fact, many of those have been changed over to the town center zoning classification, and many of those parcels are smaller than the parcel that I have my building on, okay? So what the distinction was, other than the location, I have not been able to figure out. But I objected to the fact that we're being changed from C2 to C1, and it's only that 4 blocks of businesses on the north side of Irving Park Road. I also objected to the removal of the existing property use As I said, there is none specified, unless I'm missing it somewhere in the proposal. We don't exist as a dwelling unit. I also object, which was something I researched a little further, you also change the specifications then for C1 properties as far as the dimensions and the square footage. So even if you were to grandfather, allow a non-conforming use to continue, on paper, we don't meet the requirements for the lot size. We've operated there for many years, but now we can't operate because the lot sizes don't allow it. And as I mentioned, there are other properties on Irving Park Road that have a different classification for the town center, and they're smaller. I really objected to being forced into this situation, which I think anybody here would think the same thing, of now having a non-conforming property. As the gentleman stood up and clarified with his question, yes, the non-conforming language may be very similar or even the same, but we weren't being changed to a non-conforming status until this whole initiative took place to change our property designations. So we have something to lose because you want to down zone many of these properties. I don't know what to do if the building wasn't there. Maybe I'd like to rebuild it. Same size, newer building, but I can't because it'd be more than a 50% replacement, and also my property size doesn't warrant it. So I need to buy other people's property just to improve what I have. So what I'm asking for is to, first off, not have this go through, at least not affect us as we exist in the C1. So I'd like to maintain the existing zoning specifications for those, I think it's only 8 properties there on Irving Park Road. You know, and if the argument is, you know, that together it doesn't make a difference changing, which I heard a few minutes ago, if the properties are too small, it doesn't make sense changing them because you can't acquire the other property. Well, if that's the case, why are we even talking then about changing the zoning on these 8 properties if we're not going to be able to change it anyway? So I'd also like to see the permitted use table be revised to at least include dwelling units, which again, there's no mention of it. And I would also like to see that they be removed from the non-conforming status. So I think they all tie together. I'm speaking as one person, but I think there's others here that run in the same situation. And it's probably the same thing for the C3. So I'll let the gentleman speak to that as well, because I think the principles are pretty much the same. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Suba.
Hi again. My name is Marshall Subak. I'm an attorney at Hunt and Subak, located at 1035 South York Road in Bensonville. I'm also a resident of Wooddale. I live at 168 South Central Avenue in Wooddale. Mr. Conway, I know you said try to limit everything to 5 minutes. I have an obligation to create a record for all of this, so I assure you I am going to go as quickly as I can, but it is going to go beyond the 5-minute recommendation. On behalf of, I represent many property owners along Potter Street. We have a continued objection as to the notice with respect. There's 2 things that we have going on here. I want to make sure the board, the CDC understands. And I appreciate the comments we got at the last time, and if I repeat some of these, it's not for those who are here, but for those who couldn't be at the last meeting. We have 2 things that are going on simultaneously. We're rewriting the UDO, and at the same time, we're rezoning various properties in the city of Wooddale. That's why there's such angst from the property owners, because this is their retirements, this is their investments, and there's a balance. The 2 gentlemen that are here were hired by the city of Wooddale. They're being paid by the city of Wooddale to carry out the direction that the steering committee gave to them. Your job now is to hear that but we're also asking to hear the property owners, the business owners, strike some kind of balance so that we're not trampling all over the property rights of these individuals. And I'd say the best way to do that is to put yourself, you're putting yourself already in the city's shoes, but put yourself in the property owner's shoes and saying, if I own this piece of property, would I be okay with what was happening right now? The objection to notice is continued. The city in this process didn't even follow its current UDO with respect to sending out notice. Unfortunately, we don't have enough, the same amount of people we had last time, but under the UDO, the city's supposed to be sending notice to all the property owners. They're supposed to be putting out a sign and publishing in the newspaper. They never put a sign out in front of these property owners telling them that something's going on. So please don't take the that the place is not overflowing right now as everybody's okay with this, because I'm sure they're not. As to Potter Street, you have to consider that those buildings that were built along Potter Street were all permitted by the city of Wooddale, were all present, some of them before the residential, and we have to balance with the residents. But we can't regulate the property where you make their value to be zero. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Blue, right? Mike Blue? I disagree. He says, hey, we could have zoned this residential. You couldn't zone those properties along Potter Street as residential. There's something that's called the taking, and if you regulate a property so much, and I'm not a constitutional law expert, the attorney from Ansel Glink, he knows this way better than I do, but if you regulate a property so much that you take away the value, the U.S. Constitution, the Illinois Constitution says you've got to pay that owner for that. So it's not accurate to say that they could have zoned it residential. Potter Street, before this rezoning, this proposed rezoning to C3, was actually zoned manufacturing. It was zoned M1 back in the day, and then it got rezoned to light or industrial. One of the issues said, well, this doesn't fit here now because we've combined industrial to be one industrial. Maybe that's a mistake. Maybe we should have light industrial and heavy industrial. So the stuff that's up in the industrial park can be heavy industrial, and the stuff that is maybe concurrent next to residential can be more of a light industrial. Maybe that's the answer, because Mr. Blue's going about it the other way, saying, now that we've combined these, we've got to stick it to the people on Potter Street, and we've got to change this. And that's just not, that's not fair. I'd also ask you to consider, if Potter Street was so horrible, tonight you had a property owner coming in that's right across the street from Potter Street, the first CDC case. They asked for a lot consolidation and to build a single-family home and annex to the city of Wooddale. They obviously don't have any issues with the uses that are along Potter Street, because if they did, they wouldn't be building their house there. So that's actually evidence that you got today, without even thinking about it, that says it's not as bad on Potter Street as it's coming across to be. I don't represent any of the members on Irving Park Road, but as a resident, I was happy to see the Starbucks come over, especially they stole them from my Itasca. That was great. AT&T and the 7-Eleven, that was all good. But keep in mind, all those things happened without any amendment to the UDO. So you got that redevelopment without the UDO being changed. But I don't need Amlings to come in and take away the local flower shop. I want the city to support the local flower shop so they can be there as long as they can and expand their business. The one question I have, well, actually backing up, for a couple CDC members that weren't here last time, Mr. Blue said that they didn't take away all the uses. They just kind of recategorized them on Potter Street and other places to be more general. And again, I take exception to that. I don't think it's accurate. What they left us for permitted uses was a contractor's office, food preparation or catering office, professional offices, tombstone and monument sales, sounds specific to me, radio and TV broadcasting, and minor utility and public service facilities. That's what they left for permitted uses on Potter Street. The one question I have, or I'm sure I'll have more, but for Mr. Blue, when you've rezoned the properties along Irving Park Road and on Potter Street, did you take into making these like requests for these bigger lots, did you take into consideration stormwater management and where the stormwater would go as we start getting the Walgreens possibly on the corner of, you know, Ash and Irving Park Road? Did stormwater management come into consideration with any of these zoning considerations?
That analysis would happen if there was a building permit applied for.
So your answer is no, you didn't take into consideration stormwater management in deciding?
Not on a site-specific basis, no.
Okay. The city's spending all kinds of money all the time on stormwater management issues. And if we start rezoning these properties and looking for larger developments, it might be good economically, it'll be bad for the mom and pop shops, and eventually all that water is going to go into the residential area. So all these things are not automatically good things. They have to be balanced. So with that small or short introduction, can I pass out a couple things, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Did everybody on the CDC get a copy? I sent over to staff some objections dated April 15th. Did you guys receive those?
We did get those,
All right,
Marshall.
I have new ones.
New ones?
Yeah, April 18th, so I kind of pass those out?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
So the record will reflect that the CDC has received correspondence dated April 18th, 2022, from Mr. Subak to Ms. Pocheha, detailing certain objections.
And can I approach again, Your Honor, so I can pass out the uses that we're proposing?
Absolutely.
This is a little bit different than I passed out last time.
The record will reflect that Mr. Subak has passed out a list of permitted uses to the C3 zoning along Potter Street. Mr. Subak, you previously submitted something similar to this?
I passed out one last time, and I revised it.
Okay, so this is just a revised?
Correct.
Okay.
Do you want me to stand the whole time, or probably, right?
Yeah, you can stand.
Okay. So I'm going to start with my April 15th objections. And I apologize, but there's no way to do this but to go through each one and walk you through it, if that's okay. I'm not trying to drag this out. I'm not trying to take up your time improperly.
Yeah, if you could just quickly go through it, because
Sure.
we may have some other folks that have some comments here tonight.
And I can yield anytime anybody wants me to stop and they want to just raise your hand, I'll yield and I'll go sit down. But there's no way to go through this without walking through each one. So The first one is on page 35, and this is under Article 2. Actually, backing up, I agree with Mr. Shamanik. The definition of a junkyard has to be revised, because right now a junkyard is defined as any business that has two inoperable vehicles. Many of the uses, any use that has auto repair is going to have possibly two inoperable uses, and now they're going to be classified as a junkyard. So I think I would ask staff and the consultants to work on revising the definition of junkyard. My first one after that is on page 35, section 17-201, paragraph 2, rules, regulations, application forms. It allows the development administrator to pass regulations. I think you should strike the word regulations. That should be in the city council's hands. I'm a little biased. In your hands, but staff shouldn't be passing regulations. They can pass forms, procedures, but not regulations. And so I'm just not asking these. I guess I'll ask Mr. Blue or the attorney, do you have any issues with changing and striking regulations?
I probably on most of these things, I think as you and I discussed previously, I don't have an issue with these. These are going to be policy questions in many instances. So here's why that word's in there. The development administrator has to have a way to be able to process things that come through under the terms of the UDO. So the regulations, the forms, applications, whatever it is, are consistent with the UDO requirements, which is the law. The regulations are just how the internal review process works on these things. For instance, someone just brought up the issue of stormwater. Stormwater, you brought it up actually. Stormwater is just part of the building permit process. I don't want to say it's divorced from zoning. That wouldn't be accurate to say, but at the same token, it's part of the overall zoning and building permitting process. And so when you mention that stormwater will suddenly just be flooding into residential areas, that's not accurate. That is not how that works. There are comprehensive stormwater regulations that protect properties. And part of the building permit process is the civil engineering process, which deals specifically with stormwater. So what those regulations refer to is how things are processed and things like that. But if the CDC agrees that is maybe conveying too much authority to the development administrator, then certainly it could be stricken.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think this is the best way. I have to ask them. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck or anything like that, but just to get their opinion as to why it's in there or not in there is helpful. And I wasn't implying that the stormwater is going to come rushing off. My question on the stormwater was, did they consider the size of the lots and stormwater detention? Because it is going to be needed if there's bigger developments coming in on Irving Park Road.
And I would just assure any property owner who had that concern that there is comprehensive stormwater management requirements that are part of the civil engineering review process that the city would put any building permit through. And that's true in any community in northeastern Illinois, certainly.
Okay.
Mr. Subak, just a quick procedural question. Are you going through your April 18th correspondence, or are you doing it different?
I'm doing my April 15th.
Oh, you're on your April 15th.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So, may I interrupt? Gosha, have you had the opportunity to look at this correspondence?
The one dated April 15th, yes.
Is there any major concerns from your perspective? Because we have about 24 here. And to be going back and forth.
Not that I recall. I did go through them. A lot of them were sort of suggestions or questions that were raised. A lot of it was very technical, so what we see a lot of it is Article 2, which is our administration article. I cannot recall anything that necessarily would be related to the comments that were raised at a prior public hearing. So a lot of it is very technical, and some of it is clarity, some of it is substitution of words. Like this example, regulation, and maybe different interpretation of what the word regulation could mean. But personally, I didn't find anything that would be very specific.
Thank you, Gosha.
So is it staff's recommendation to incorporate all my changes in my April 15th,
Well,
2022 correspondence?
I don't think we said that.
Oh, I didn't know what, I didn't know what she was saying, okay. So then I'll keep going, if
What-
that's okay,
yeah,
Mr.
why don't we do
Chairman.
about 10 more minutes, Marshall, and then
I have to create a record,
it's...
Sean.
You have created a record. You've
I know, but
submitted
I've got to
your
walk through
objections.
because I don't know if the committee understands all the questions I'm talking about. So it's not going to be, Sean,
So you
limited
have-
to 10 minutes.
You have 10 minutes to create your record. So-
So under the case law, you can't cut off cross-examination
No,
at a
there's
public
reasonable
hearing.
time limits that you can put on it, so...
Yeah, and 10 minutes for these type of
Continue. You're
changes
using your
is not
time
going to be
right now.
enough.
Continue.
So on page 36, section 17-201, it limits the extension request to 90 days. That's too short. Page 37, for enforcement, it uses the word punish. That one of the words is that we want to punish if anybody's out of compliance. I don't think that's proper in zoning. Page 40. The effect paragraph should be stricken in its entirety. Page 43, the recoverable cost requires that the petitioner pay for professional and technical consulting services and legal review. That should be stricken in its entirety. Paragraph 44, page 6, page 44, paragraph 6. It exempts all their public bodies from paying fees. That's not fair to the residents of Wooddale, especially in Ward 1, where you have, for example, part of our residents go to the Bensonville Park District, but if the Bensonville Park District comes in here, they are exempt from fees. You should be able to charge fees if you need to the other taxing bodies. They may have big projects. You can always waive them later. Page 52, for notices, it's gotten rid of for public hearing. I'll ask the attorney or the Mike Blue. For public hearings, it eliminates the requirement to send out notices to everybody within 250 feet.
Yes.
I think that if you change, here's what can happen. We're changing zoning. Some people got noticed here, most didn't. Now with the UDO, if you change this in the future, you don't need to send notice. So we can make all these changes to the UDO and adopt them, and then later on, the city council can amend the UDO and eliminate uses, amortize out uses, and they don't have to get notice, correct?
So so right now, the code requires a notice be sent to surrounding property owners within 250 feet of the surrounding property. A lot of communities have this. We will ordinarily suggest that that be removed because the more effective way of giving public notice of a zoning change of any kind is through the posting of a sign. Now, specific to a rezoning situation where perhaps a use is being downzoned, upzoned, whatever, there's a case that you may be familiar with from the Illinois Supreme Court that says if you're going to be changing the zoning regulations to a specific property.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm not getting charged my 10 minutes on his long answer. Right, Sean? Correct?
We'll give you a couple minutes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
You would have to give notice to that property owner so that they're aware that the municipality, in this instance, would be seeking to change their zoning. The only other way the zoning is going to change is if that property owner wants to seek the rezoning.
But that's for changing the zoning, but not changing of the uses under the UDO.
Well, if conceivably, it could be the case that, and we tried to be sensitive to this when we were looking at the map and considering areas to rezone, to send out the information about upzoning, downzoning that went to property owners. So, that is something that would typically be part of the process the city would go through to ensure that the public is aware of what's happening. But yes, you're right. Under here, no. We got rid of the 250-foot zoning requirement, and we moved to a posting of a sign as the preferred method of communicating zoning changes. And I think he has about 3.5 minutes now.
Thank you.
No, it's actually 3 minutes and 39 seconds.
Left?
That, on the time you took two, so.
Okay.
3:39.
Okay.
So we got
All right.
9 minutes left.
Continue, Mr. Subak.
So I have a question for Gosha. Gosha, is it a large staff burden to send out notice when somebody does a zoning change to 250 feet in the area?
It really depends on the size of the lot. And one thing, if I may, as you are aware, all of the articles that are being considered by CDC right now have gone through the UDO steering committee. This particular question about required notices was brought up very specifically, and the direction from the UDO steering committee was to eliminate the mailing requirement. So that was a conversation that sort of the direction staff is getting from the UDO steering committee. And in terms of the burden, sometimes it is, sometimes it's, it really depends on the size of the properties, right? We do a buffer, and some of the properties are smaller, some of them are condominiums. So we've had sometimes where we have to send 500 notices, sometimes it's only 50. It really depends.
Question for the attorney on page 60. Authorized variations. The way I read this for the CDC is that, and this is going to save somebody's job, the current UDO only allows certain variances to be granted by the city council. All other variances cannot. And that's been a real thorn for the city council. I read this that we're only that the city council can only, and this board can only list or grant those variances that are listed on page 60 or to 61. Is that correct, Mr. Attorney?
Yeah, that would be the jurisdictional limits of the CDC.
There's nothing in here that allows for a parking variance or for a parking lot variance as far as number of parking spaces?
To vary applicable off-street parking and off-street loading requirements is among the things that would fall within the CDC's purview.
Would you agree it's a policy decision on to what variances the city council and the CDC wants to grant and what
Yes.
they don't?
Yes.
You want to give you guys as much latitude as possible so that this, when we find out the problems with this, people can come in and ask for a variance and staff can't say, that's not a variance we can grant. You should have full authority to grant any variances that goes forward with. You can deny it, but at least let them come forward and plead their case. So I think page 60, paragraph 5, needs a lot of work. If you want to do anything to say, we can grant any variances that are allowed in the code at your discretion. Page 88, this is as a resident, the outside dining is way too restrictive. We should be encouraging the businesses to do outdoor dining. It's way too restrictive. I don't know if we took it from another town, but that needs work. I'll ask you to consult Mr. Blue, where'd you come up with the outside dining? Was that part of the recommendation from the steering committee?
The steering committee saw it, but we built it from other ordinances that we've used in other places where we've seen these kind of regulations. The idea is to have them spelled out rather than have them being considered on a case-by-case basis, so that the businesses that want to do outdoor dining know exactly what they have to do. If there are some of these that the city would rather not see, they can come out. But the idea is to make this easier for the restaurant so they don't have to go through a lot of questions and a lot of back and forth with staff. It's all spelled out in the ordinance. If there's going to be fewer, there can be fewer.
And I'll just add on the extent of authority the CDC has to grant variations, that was actually pulled from the current code. We didn't add anything there. That's what's existing.
On the uses, I'm asking the CDC to incorporate what I passed out tonight for the C3. what I did is I went through and I took what was on the light industrial before, so that anybody who has an existing business in there now is gonna be able to continue to have an existing business. So, and I did place some of them on a special use that would come before you as a special use. Getting back to my objections. Right now is drafted, anything that's not a permitted use or special use is prohibited. It's not allowed. So if you get the table wrong, it's not allowed. So you need to strike the language in the code that says anything that's not a permitted use and a special use is a prohibited use. And the attorney, can you remind me where that section is? I'm being rushed.
I can't, because this is a long document, so it's in there, you've identified it, we know it's a concern. As I pointed out at the public hearing last month, that's actually something that exists in the current UDO as well.
On page 87 for outside storage, talks about having to screen all the way around. I have a question for Mr. Blue. When you talk about screening all the way around, did you take into consideration a line of sight along Ash Avenue and the railroad tracks for the railroad? Because we're part of a quiet zone now, and so the train doesn't blow its horn. And you're gonna have a line of sight problem if they start enclosing all those backs of those lots.
Yeah. That's a great point. We typically base this on the industrial area, and that's a good point. We could take that out. Thank you.
We got one. On page 121, the table for C3, by adopting this table, you are creating non-conforming lots. All the lots on Potter Street would be non-conforming. None of them are first of all, there's a typographical error. It says maximum lot width, that should say minimum, correct?
That's correct. That was a Scribner's error that was
So-
pointed out last time.
And that's okay. So it says a minimum of 100. You need to amend that to be 50, because all of my clients' lots are 50 feet wide. They're not 100 feet wide. So we're creating non-conforming lots by adopting this, and that's a bad idea. Would you agree, Mr. Blue? We shouldn't create non-conforming lots by adopting new regulations?
Again, as we mentioned with some of the other districts, the intent is to help redevelopment. It's to help future redevelopment of a larger type of use.
On page 141, it talks about additional standards. I'm going to my April 18th. My April 18th objections. On page 141, it talks about additional standards for the C3 zoning. It says, accessory parking associated with C3 zoning districts under subparagraph III, directly accessed in public right-of-way shall only be permitted through a special use. Mr. Blue, did you look at the Potter Street buildings before you drafted that language?
We did.
All of the access is off of Potter Street, so all the parking would have to be required a special use permit, correct?
For the parking, yeah. Under a new development, it would, yeah. But I see your point. It's well taken.
So you agree to strike that?
No, I think it's a good point. We can talk to the CDC about whether or not they'd like to strike it.
So I would ask the CDC strike that,
Which one is this?
because now all of a sudden, all the parking has to get a special use permit and go through that. Too much regulation, they're not gonna come. Subparagraph 4, loading and unloading of vehicles shall not be constructed in any part of the right-of-way. For the properties along Potter Street, there is no other place to do unloading and loading. It all has to come off of Potter Street. There's no other access. There's no access along the railroad tracks. So if you have a truck that comes and delivers product, it has to unload on Potter Street. There's other regulations we have that says you can't park there, you can't go there too early, you can't unload late at night. All those things are protecting the residents. But the way they've drafted this, you have to do the unloading somewhere else. That's gonna make these buildings useless. Mr. Blue, where else could we unload if we don't use the public right-of-way?
Again, the idea is that as sites redevelop, that it gets done within the property. That's why the properties are intended to be wider and larger and accommodate more development.
So your goal for drafting it this way is to get redevelopment along Potter Street?
Not the goal, but to say that if there was redevelopment.
2 more minutes, Mr. Subak.
Whoa. It also says installing bicycle parking, which is not possible. Outdoor screening in paragraph 141D we talked about. Mr. Conway, I'm again going to say, to limit me to 10 minutes.
I understand your
It's just,
objection.
it's
I
just
understand.
wrong, because,
It hasn't been 10 minutes.
I know, but
You've had over 20 minutes.
I
at this
understand
hearing.
that, but
You've had over 20 minutes at the prior hearing, covering the
the
most of
prior
the same
hearing with a
objections.
week, with 5 days of notice, so we're, again, we're not waiving our
Your
objection.
objection
Our-
is noted. 2 minutes, please.
Correct. As to the non-conforming uses, regulating them, the attorney said that we would not be able to sell to a new owner. If you look at, this is how tricky this stuff gets and borderline improper. Page 189, section 17-703, continued status of nonconformity. What's common is a legal nonconforming runs with the land. So it allows you to sell the property, and you can tell to the buyer, if I'm selling my property to Mr. Peterson, hey, Mr. Peterson, yes, I'm legal nonconforming, but you can continue that. As this has been drafted, subparagraph C says, nonconforming status resets with the rests with the property, not with the subject owner. So when I read that as a marginally intelligent attorney, I said, great, it runs with the land. Such status is not affected by the change in ownership or management. When I asked the attorney that during the break, he said no, that would eliminate upon the sale. So I guess I need the attorney to state it for the record, that you're reading, sir, is that subparagraph C on page 189 is that it does not transfer to a subsequent owner, correct?
Subparagraph C has to be read in coordination with another provision that I'm looking for, but as I told Gosha while you were going through your letter, we will provide responses to these, and I know this is a concern of yours, and I will address this more completely when I have a better chance, as opposed to sitting here at the public hearing to read the regulations again.
But I guess, did the steering committee give you guys direction to say that
No.
upon the no?
No. That minutia did not come up.
What he calls minutia is their ability to sell their property to somebody else and keep their legal nonconforming status. That's brutal. That's not minutia. That's Michael Latoria's kid's retirement. You know, those are big issues. So I'm not trying to drag this out, but as drafted right now, I would either ask you to incorporate all of my changes, including the list. And I'll give you one more example, is the list is better if it's general versus specific. I represented Article 2, which was a indoor gun range with gun sales. Many towns didn't have a specific identity for gun sales, and it would fall under retail sales. So guess what? If you don't have specifically gun sales in a specific area, anywhere you got retail sales, you can have gun sales. Some people would say, I don't want that gun sales to be next to the flower shop and next to the Dairy Queen. We want it to be legally somewhere, but maybe somewhere not quite on the main strip. So the general versus the specific is not, that's a policy decision. And I would urge you to go with the more specific list so that the owners can have certainty, the businesses that are coming into Wooddale can have certainty, and don't just assume that the list is going to be correct, because it's not. And also remember, if it's not on the list as specific or special use, it's prohibited, not allowed. So as drafted, I'd ask you to say deny. Deny it, and let's kick it up to the city council and see if they can fix it with a supermajority. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Subas. Is there anybody else in the crowd that would like to? Yes, sir. And just for the record, sir, you were sworn in at the prior public
At the prior meeting, I came in late. I'm happy to be sworn in again if you'd like.
Yeah, let's just do it.
Just tell me your name, please.
formality.
Of course, my name is Carl Camelucci. Would you like to swear me in now, or?
No, you were sworn in.
I was sworn in before.
earlier. Yes.
Very well.
Go ahead.
My name is Carl Camelucci. I'm a lawyer with the Taft Law Firm in Chicago. We represent 895 Wooddale LLC, which is owned by Gullo International Development. I spoke last time about aspects of the proposed amendments. Forgive me for coming in late. I had another meeting this evening as well, so I came here as soon as I could, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight. My colleague Richard is going to distribute to you a letter that we submitted by email earlier today that we would like to be submitted as part of the record. And this letter, in writing, memorializes many of the points that I discussed last time, but provides a little bit more detail. There's, in the interest of time, knowing that it's late and you've already heard from a lot of people, and that I already spoke to some of these issues last time, I'd like to focus on a couple of issues tonight to call your attention to them, and then I hope that you will also read the letter. First of all, there was some discussion last time about notice, and I don't know how much that was discussed tonight. But after the last meeting, I went back and looked at the code provisions regarding notice, and I just wanted to mention a couple of points to you. First of all, there was some question last time about whether it was required to have posted notice on the property prior to holding the public hearing, and I believe there was some discussion that it was not required. Looked back at the existing notice requirements in the current UDO, and in fact, for any zoning map amendment, it is required to post notice on the property. And I think there was some discussion here last time that it was, from the city's perspective, impracticable to post notice because there were so many properties being rezoned in connection with the proposed amendment of the UDO. But we would say that given that this is such a large amendment to the zoning map, notice is even more important. And many people discussed that they weren't aware of the proposed amendments until soon before the last meeting. And so we wanted to point out that the notice requirements of the existing UDO with respect to posting notice were not followed, and that poses some problems both in terms of compliance with the existing UDO, but also potentially due process. With respect to zoning matters, when there are protected property interests at stake, notice and the hearing are not just things that are in the code for a random reason. It's because the intention of those provisions is to protect people's due process rights. And so because the notice was not posted, we believe that the hearing needs to be renoticed with posted notice in order for the hearing to be valid. Second issue that we talked a little bit about last time was the mailed notice. And I just want to reiterate that even if the mailed notice had been mailed on time, the actual UDO was not made publicly available until 7 days or so before the hearing was purportedly opened. And in some cases, a notice need not include the entire amendment. In other words, if you were just amending a small provision of the zoning ordinance, it's sufficient for the notice to generally describe the nature of the amendment, and that's enough to inform people with an interest of what's going to be discussed at the hearing, and they have adequate notice and an opportunity to be heard if they choose to appear at the hearing. But when you're talking about a wholesale revision of the UDO and many different zoning map amendments, it's impossible to describe that in enough particularity to give people real notice for due process purposes. And therefore, we think that the mailed notice was also deficient and raises due process issues as well. So I wanted to flag those two issues for you. This letter goes through some of the comments that I made last time regarding the 20-acre requirement in the newly proposed TIO district and how that actually discourages new development and would decrease property values rather than its stated intention of facilitating additional development and increasing property values. I won't go through all of that again because we discussed it last time and because it's stated here in the letter. However, I did want to talk a little bit about potential ways of amending or revising the proposed UDO to accomplish the city's goal, as I understand it, of encouraging larger scale development in the area included within the proposed TIO district without imposing an onerous requirement on existing building owners that will make it very difficult for them to redevelop or sell their properties and reduce the value of their properties. And that is to incentivize assembling of property rather than requiring a 20-acre minimum. One way of doing that might be to say, eliminate the minimum development area requirement, but say, if you're able to assemble property of 20 acres, or it could even be a continuum, so you could have one threshold at 10 acres and another threshold at 20 acres, then the developer would be eligible for certain density bonuses. And what we mean by density bonuses is typically you can only develop a property over a certain amount of its lot area, or you can only develop a property with a certain floor area ratio or a certain building height. And different lot area coverage requirements and floor area ratio requirements and building height requirements basically determine the size of the building that can be built on the property and therefore the amount of revenue that can be generated from the property. So you could incentivize people to assemble lots into larger parcels and develop them as larger parcels by giving them the opportunity to build bigger buildings on them. That's essentially one way of saying, we want to encourage this type of development, but we're not going to require it in a way that would prevent some of the owners or some developers from doing anything of value with their property at all. We would appreciate the opportunity to explore with this commission and the city council and its consultants ways of incentivizing larger assemblages to help promote the city's goals, but without the onerous 20-acre requirement, which we feel is unduly burdensome, would reduce property values and discourage development in the TIO. I'm going to leave it there tonight because I think you've already heard from a lot of people, and those are the important new points from last time that we wanted to make. I'd be happy to answer any questions if any commissioners have questions. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a statement? Okay. All right. Do the CDC members have any follow-up questions for the consultants?
In the last meeting in March, I had asked the three attorneys that were here to if they would follow up with us and help us out. And the two of you that are here, on myself and I think the committee, we appreciate you being here and following up. And Marshall, I know you put a lot of time into these April 15th and the 18th, and so thank you for that. Can I ask the consultants, did you see his note of April 15th by any chance?
Yeah, we got it the other day.
Any comments, or?
As I said, some of the, as we've said jointly, some of these are policy questions, some of these are technical questions, and some of them are questions as to how you'd like to see development or practices happen. So, some of them I don't know that I would typically do, but a lot of them are ones I think are worth discussing.
Well, here's the thing that I would like to see is, as you take these two letters, the 18th and the 15th, and maybe respond back to us.
As David indicated,
You know,
we'll do
each
that.
point, I mean,
Absolutely.
that's what you're, you know, there's a reason you wrote the way you wrote it, I would assume, and I think it would be helpful to us to understand, and some may be valid, some maybe not, you know, and then we can look at it that way. The other question I had, and I should have done it when Mr. Gentleman back there with the property, 6 apartments, your last name was an F, and that's all. He had mentioned it had gone from C2 to C1. Any reason for that?
Again, as we've mentioned a couple of times, the C1, C2 distinction is really about lot size, and that most of the distinction is not so much use, but the size of the uses, and that's why. The question that came up is whether or not apartments are permitted, but in terms of the C1, C2, it was really about lot size and what can be developed on a given lot, having room for parking and other.
Are you comfortable with that answer?
No. C2 allows dwelling units, C1 does not, if I recall correctly. So they're not addressing residential use of the property as rental units.
Gosha, you have an answer for that?
If I may, and I apologize, this wasn't brought up earlier. As the meeting was going on, I verified, currently, neither C1 or C2, under the existing UDO regulations, allows multiple dwelling units. So technically, currently, the way it is, it's a non-conforming use.
See, here's the thing that bothers me, and I wish the gentleman from White Glove was still here, and I should have got him when he was up there. You know, he said, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. What aren't we doing? I never got an answer from him. He was pointing the finger, but I don't know where he was talking about. And I think if we could address some of these people, some of these issues, either from your end or from the consultants, I think that would make everybody much more comfortable. That's my opinion.
And one thing I will offer, I have received a number of inquiries through email or phone calls, and we've always provided responses. So I would encourage, if there's any particular ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want anyone walking, there's going to be people that it's going to happen. Can't please everyone. But, you know, I'd like to see more and more of the people that have been here the last 2 meetings feel comfortable with what's going on. And that's kind of the way I'd like to see it from my position.
Anybody else?
For you, Gosha, going back to notice and mail, I think we know that the sign program hasn't worked for us. Every time we've went by, signs are laying down on the ground. If it weren't for people letting you know that put them back up, people would have never even known. That's why I think the mail needs to stay in. The steering committee, how many people are on that committee?
I believe there were 4 aldermen, and I know there were members of the public. It is on our website, so if you want to give me a second, I can
Okay.
probably check the
I'll
list.
give you a second, take your time.
Thank you. Government. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there were 8 members plus the mayor, so a total of 9.
How many were just residents? Take the aldermen out of it.
1, 2, there's 3.
3. Just my thought, but I would have thought it probably would have been good to have at least 8.
Gotcha. All of the
2 from
members.
every ward, 1 residential, 1 commercial. I mean, you're affecting every part of the darn city,
Very valid
but you're
point.
not letting everybody from the city.
The members of
be
the
part of it.
UDO steering committee were appointed by the mayor.
Well, I think it might have been the wrong move from the start then.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yes?
I'd like a notification for any changes to go out to everyone that's in that ward, not just 250 feet away from it. I think that's everybody's business in that ward.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
And I'd like to hear more what Marshall has to say. I was given this packet tonight. There's 300 pages of stuff to read. I should have been given this. I know I wasn't here for the March meeting.
It is the same
But I would
document.
have gotten this packet on March.
It's the draft UDO, it's the same one that was
These
distributed.
packets ought to be delivered to our homes.
And that.
I'm not gonna sit in front of a copying machine and download 300
Okay.
pages.
So
I
usually.
got other things to do in my life.
Thank you. So I usually offer to print whoever needs a copy. Unfortunately, with the staff that we have, I don't have the ability
Well,
to do personal deliveries, and
They ought to find
that's
the
been
staff
typical.
and make them deliver them.
I will relay that, thank you.
It's absurd to get a packet and have 10 minutes to read it.
Any other,
I do.
yes?
I'm not, probably not as smart as these guys sitting here, so I'm gonna ask this question. Is there anything in zoning as a concept of overlay zoning? And is that concept something that could be used to provide a benefit to the city, yet also look at maintaining what the current people do have practice here as their zoning, so that it does not inhibit their value to their properties or their ability to make a transaction, but it still allows the city in the future to have some type of opportunity or control to use it in a manner that you wish. I'm trying to understand why there isn't something that, a mechanism that works in that way that would benefit everyone, and why we have to limit ourselves to just staying inside a box.
He's writing because he wants me to answer.
Yeah, right.
It's a great question. So in theory, just to take a step back with the overlay, right? The idea of the overlay is it's something that crosses zoning districts. So it might be something like the overlay that we have as part of the I-1 and the C2, all the stuff that's up north. The idea is that it's an additional set of rules for those geographies, right? So that's just in theory, so everybody sitting here understands what it's for. So to the extent there was something that the city wanted to do that, I don't know, related to how something could be developed or what the non-conforming rules were, if there were gonna be differences between districts, an overlay would be a way to do that. Alternatively, it could be something that was applied to certain zoning districts, right? So a lot of what you've heard here has been about certain zoning districts, like, well, we have an issue with the C3, we're concerned about C1 and C2. If you wanted to apply an extra set of how to use these things for those districts, you could just put those regulations within those individual districts. Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
And nothing within that prohibits someone from continuing their business as they are, but it gives an option for both the city and someone who might accumulate land to change it in the future to that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, sir, did you want to make a statement? You just approach the podium, please.
My name is Richard Kass, K-A-S-S.
And Mr. Cass, did you take an oath tonight?
Yes, in
You did
the
at
front.
the
Yes, I'm in the
beginning.
front,
Okay, great,
7 a.m.
And what was your first name? I'm sorry.
Richard, it's easy.
Richard?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm owner building 429 Potter Wood. I'm so sorry for this, guys. I'm spent 70 hours for working each week. I don't see my kids too much time. My English is not perfect. This is the reason I'm listening here all the time, and I change my mind. I come in here, listen to what you guys have stock. I don't know nothing about what happened today. If nobody put something, piece of paper for my front door, I miss this, okay? People have a lot of ideas what we can doing better, and I'm like, this guy spent, I don't know, days for this reading what you have. Why don't shut him after 10, 15 minutes? I know he's a lot papers, but this is the change what we have. I buy the property 2 years ago, and if the zone is changed, I'm lose money for this property. And I'm like spend the time, I don't see my kids, I like spend more time, listen what the guy have, what the people have different information. And thank you very much for this, okay?
Thank you, sir. Okay. Any further questions on the CDC?
Tonight, we've seen a lot of people come up with a lot of what we seem to have problems with this UDO. Is there something we can do so that you guys can sit with them and somewhat work out some of this? Because obviously, it's not the perfect plan. It's never going to have it, we know that. But there certainly seems to be a lot of holes in it.
I'll second that.
Okay, so as we discussed at the last meeting, we were going to split this into basically 2 meetings. This meeting, we reviewed roughly half of the articles. We intend to review the other half of the articles at the next meeting. And Ms. Bocheha, can you just remind me, are we scheduled for an April 25th meeting?
That is correct.
Okay.
So the intent, I have reached out to a number of staff, and I know not everyone is available, but staff is hoping that we could call a special call meeting April 25th, also at 7 p.m. From the responses I have received, we should have a quorum. That would allow us to kind of keep the topic fresh and get through the rest of the chapters. The idea is that the final motions and any conditions and so on for the UDO from CDC would happen at that subsequent meeting. So essentially today, we would just continue until the next meeting. And as I stated, based on the responses I've gotten, we should have a quorum at April 25th, which is a week from today.
Okay. So what I will suggest is a motion to continue this public hearing in case number CDC 2022-02 to April 25, 2022 at 7 p.m.
That is correct.
Okay. That's the motion.
Is that for specific areas?
Yeah, that will be for Articles 5, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Do I have that right?
That is correct. Yeah, I have them on the slide.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
perfect.
We'll also have a response to Attorney Subak's letters from
The consultants have indicated they will
Letters.
prepare those things. Okay, so that is, that's the recommended motion.
May I ask a point of clarification? I thought that meetings, public hearings could not be continued at the meeting unless it was to a regularly scheduled meeting rather than a special meeting. I'm not sure that the commission may continue this hearing to a special meeting. I appreciate that.
Duly noted, you can continue this meeting to a special meeting. You can, absolutely. Okay, so that's the recommended motion.
I will make that motion to continue this meeting for 25 April 2022 at 7 p.m.
Second.
Okay, we have a roll call now.
Yes. Mr. Babowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Ochoa?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Shemanik?
Yes.
Ms. Zadko?
Yes.
And Mr. Woods?
No.
Motion passes, so the public hearing and this matter will be continued to April 25th at 7 p.m. And so I will now yield the floor back to you, Mr. Chairman, for the remaining items.
Certainly. Well, everyone, that concludes tonight's hearing matter. We'll proceed with the next portion from staff. Do you have any report?
At this moment, we do not have any report. Thank you.
We'll move on to adjournment. Can I get a motion? Can I get a second?
My meetings are done by 4, I should be fine.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
3 hours to get back.
All those opposed signify by stating no. Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned.